name is Jaap Veselius. In this presentation I'm going to show you how to publish Outlook Anywhere using Threat Management Gateway 2010. In my previous presentation I showed you how to publish Outlook Web App using TMG 2010. A web client connected using the internet to the Threat Management Gateway was authenticated, and then the request was handed over to the client access server. For Outlook Anywhere this is basically the same. An Outlook client connects to the Threat Management Gateway, is authenticated there against the domain controller, and then passed on through the client access server. This one handles the request, gets the mail data from the mailbox, and hand it back to the Outlook client. For this presentation, my TMG server is part of the internal domain. This makes life a little bit easier because I can use Active Directory for authentication. Now when we go to the forefront TMG console, we still see the publishing rule for OWA we created last month. There was a web listener, and I can select its properties here. It's listening on the internal network. This is a TMG server with only one network interface. SSL. We use the webmail.inframan.nl certificate. For authentication we still use HTML form authentication, and here we select Windows Active Directory. If the TMG server is not a member of the domain, you can select LDAP between brackets Active Directory. The next step is that you have to configure validation servers, forms and single sign-on for my inframan.nl domain. I select tasks, and then I select Publish Exchange Web Client Access, and I give it a name, Inframan Outlook Anywhere, and I'm going to select Exchange Server 2007 because I have an Exchange Server 2007 here. I can also select Exchange 2010 of course, and I'm going to publish Outlook Anywhere, and I'm going to publish additional folders for Outlook 2007 clients because we also have to publish, for example, auto discovery information. I'm going to publish a single website or load balancer, and I'm going to use HSL for this. So again, I give it a name. I use the same name both internally as well as externally. I'm going to enter an IP address of the client access server. You have to be aware though that the name should be resolvable from the Threat Management Gateway. Public name. You have to be aware of typos of course. I'm going to select the web listener we created last month, and I'm not going to select negotiate, but I'm going to select basic authentication here. So the Threat Management Gateway is using basic authentication against the client access server. To select all authenticated users, and then I'm almost done. I select the properties, and we can go through the various tabs here. The name, action, allow, from anywhere to, webmail.inframan.nl, this is the IP address, and I'm going to select request appear to come from the original client here. Select the traffic, the web listener, the public name. This is webmail.inframan.nl, but when you use Outlook 2007 or 2010 externally, it will also select the auto discover information. So I'm going to enter here auto discover.inframan.nl, and I select apply. These names should also be accessible from the TMG server of course. Now these are the paths that are being used, and when I set test rule, you see a couple of them are okay, but a couple of them are failing. That's because we have selected basic authentication, and basic authentication is not enabled by default on the virtual servers, virtual directories. So I'm going to the Exchange server here, and I'm going to select Get Web Services Virtual Directory. I have only one, so I'm going to pipe the output into the Set Web Services Virtual Directory and set it to true. So Get Web Services Virtual Directory pipe Set Web Services Virtual Directory minus basic authentication $true. I'm going to do the same for the offline address book virtual directory. Basic authentication true. And since we are using Exchange Server 2007, we also have to configure the unified messaging virtual directory. Virtual directory set virtual directory. Now, basic authentication. These are very important steps, because if you fail to do this, then your publishing rule will never function correctly. So we go back to the TMG server, go to test the rule again, and now we see they are all checked. Application setting, not much to configure here anymore. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to apply our newly created publishing rule. OK. Now we want to test this. So how do we test this? Using the remote connectivity analyzer. So I select here activity.com. This remote connectivity analyzer is a service created by Microsoft. It's a website you can use for testing your Exchange environment externally. Test Exchange connectivity. There it is. And I'm going to select Outlook Anywhere. You can also select Web Services Connectivity Test or Active Sync or inbound or outbound SMTP messages. I'm going to select Outlook Anywhere, RPC over HTTP, and I'm going to enter some values here. I can manually enter the Exchange properties, but I'm going to use Auto Discover for this. And I'm going to select Perform Test. And now the web server is going to test my Exchange environment using the Threat Management Gateway. It's going to test my Exchange environment and see if all is configured correctly. So it's going to test the DNS entry, it's going to test the Auto Discover information, it's going to submit an XML request to the Auto Discover virtual server, and then it's retrieving information from my Exchange environment. It's going to test everything it gets. So right now it's going to test the RPC connectivity to my Exchange server. So we are already past the Threat Management Gateway here. This is going to take some time. The page is refreshed every 5 seconds, but it's going to take, I guess, about a minute before it's finished. And now you can see the connectivity test was successful. And it's showing here all the tests it has done. And in the end, everything was successful. Now, if something fails, you can click on additional information and it will show you where it exactly fails. And when you have corrected this, you can say, okay, start over or run the test again. So, my name is Jaap Zelius. And in this presentation I showed you how to configure a threat management gateway for use with Outlook Anywhere. Thanks for your time and see you next month.